Hi, everybody. Um, I'm here for introducing you our lecturer for this last appointment with the Apples lecture. Here with us we have Paolo Cascone, Dr. Paolo Cascone, that is an architect and an academic that grew up in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. He has a lot of experience all around the world. He graduated in Naples and he started his research in the intersection of ecological design, digital fabrication, and sustainable construction at the Architectural Association in London. He is founding director of the Co-Design Lab and the scientific director of the African Fabbers research platform, with many projects and realized in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, Dr. Cascone is a senior lecturer in the University of Westminster, where he is leading master in architecture and environmental design, and he is a visiting researcher in the Politecnico di Milano. His work is published in several occasions, in several publications across Europe and US, and I'm very happy to have Dr. Cascone with us today, and I leave him the floor to his interesting lecture.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm particularly happy to share this work with a group of students and PhD students from the Polytechnic of Turin. And today I will introduce a little bit let's say, the principles behind the African Faber Atlas. And the African Faber Atlas is condensing basically almost 15 years of researches and applied researches and realized project, different places around sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Morocco. And the work started in a situation like this when I was teaching in Paris with my students, mainly European and African. I'd say half of the class in my design studio is African, not African French. And we start to develop this idea of let's say, somehow culturally shift the way of studying, analyzing sub-Saharan Africa as a platform to learn from, which was quite radical at that time. Today is a little bit different. Today, Africa and Global South are more considerate in the agenda of Global North universities much more than before. 15 years ago, it was a little bit different. There was a lot of people was skeptical about this kind of cultural, but I would say also political statement. No? What is advanced? What is performative? Do we really think that what we have been producing in our Western societies is the only option to basically deal with complexity, with climate issues, with social and economic issues? So the question is not answered in our practices, is not somehow developed in our research agenda enough to and the answer was coming from a conversation with my students, but also from my personal part. So African Fabrics is a combination of my personal part and cultural part and my practice and my part as an educator and researcher. I'm originally from Naples, Italy. I grew up in Africa for family reasons. And so I'm saying this because we need to take these things in account. We need to take these things, our personal part, and the way we are cultivating this, and the way this is affecting our way of developing researches and projects. So, so the book is somehow trying to. So, just one second. Let me try. Okay, great. So the book is structured in a way in which this story, 15 years work, is explained from different perspectives and different points of view. First of all, within a sort of statement on the relation between climate change and the consequence of climate change in some of these regions where we've been, potentialities and contradictions. Again, trying to shape this common place where whatever is happening in these regions is subject to humanitarian aids. African Farm has never been a humanitarian project. It has been more like an experimental platform, a research platform. We never been thinking to save lives. And I think this is very important. The cultural emergency. What is interesting for us is not the question of the emergency as something that has a humanitarian aspect, but emergency as something related to emergent dynamics. Emergent dynamics means dynamics that are happening over time because they are in osmosis with a specific community and specific territory. So, so the first chapter is talking about the paradox of producing a very small amount of greenhouse gas emissions and being affected by extreme climatic issues. The paradox of having a lot of, let's say, raw materials without having the chance to transform these raw materials on site and redistributing, let's say, economy on site. The paradox of having a very young generation of people. Africa is growing very, very fast, much more than Europe, which is more like stagnant. But the accessibility to university is still a problem, is still an issue. Accessibility to education is still an issue. So we start to understand what is happening, what is, how people is migrating because of that. And what is happening is not just an African problem, is is a little bit more complex. It's something that is arriving to our Western or North societies. So we're starting to map environmental issues, socio-economic issues. We're starting to map educational issues, the history of universities and schools of architecture in Africa, how they are dealing with local specificities, how they are dealing with their own heritage. And this is what is informing the origin of African Fabbers. And then, of course, the book is integrating some contribution about the topics, contribution from different people from different backgrounds, not necessarily African. I'm not African, I'm not black. But I can speak about Africa because of my experience, because my research. I can express my ideas. I can exchange my ideas with people from different contexts, different background. I'm saying this because, especially in some contexts in the United States and also UK, where I'm studying, it looks like there are people who can speak just from their own perspective, their own So, for example, I'm from Naples, but I'm not living in Naples since almost 25 years. I'm UK, but I'm not British. I shouldn't speak about anything, basically. So we need to find a way to also shift this issue of, black people talking about black issues and African issues, and white people talking about white things. And I think the university is probably the best place to start to break these barriers in 2025. So the regions of African Fabbers is about bridging. It's about bridging. It's about establishing dialogues between what we think is an advanced culture, what we think is a like a more informal culture, reaching what we think is a complex approach to environmental and social issues, and what is a responsive way to. The way we did it is basically outside the institutions for a long time. So I'm in the academia since a long time, but the way African Fabbers started as an itinerant school of architecture and ecological construction and urban ecology was completely unacademic, completely independent, and completely autonomous for different reasons. Because we wanted to experiment, because we didn't want to assess our experiment within the conventional ways, and because we want to connect people that not necessarily from the academia, which is strategically very, very relevant to us. So the contribution are from people that are both in the academia and outside the academia. They are not just architects. They are not just African cultural anthropologists, ethnomathematics, engineers, activists, eventually architect, stakeholders, people from UN Habitat. So just to introduce a couple of them. Christian Benimana from Kigali, Rwanda, studied at Tongji University in China, and developed the PhD, GSD, Harvard, and then back to Rwanda to develop a school of self-construction. So, but people are traveling, ideas are traveling, and I think this is one of the most interesting aspects on how also Africans from the diaspora, like the young generation, are connecting what they learn from their own countries and their regions, from what they learn in different academic experience. So Christian Benimana is a very interesting example of someone who is somehow hacking both cultures and bridging both cultures. Sheikh Diallo is a designer, Bamako, in Mali. He studied at the festival in Senegal, and then he won the bursary scholarship to study design in France, and then got back to Mali and developed not just an office of design, but a factory, so a space for production. So people like this. Ron English is not African. He's an ethnomathematic. He's teaching at the University of Michigan. He wrote a book that I strongly suggest you, which is called African Fractals, which is basically reconstructing mathematical models out of informal settlements. So computational design without computing, spontaneous settlements, recursive systems, systems that are generating other systems. So Ron English is in between cultural anthropology and computer science. And other people, again, I don't want you to say them are, for example, Abdul Malik Simon is teaching at the Columbia University and then University of Sheffield. I think he's involved with some research also here at the Polytechnic of Turin. He wrote a lot of interesting books and articles, based on his own experience on black urbanism, slums, informal dynamics related to slums, self-organizations, way people are organizing themselves into communities, sharing space, sharing technologies, and so on and so forth. So the conversation is informing the agenda for a long, long time, in parallel to the African Farms Project, the taxonomy project, which I will explain later on, that are split by macro agendas and topics. The first one is from generative component to living infrastructure. So this idea, which is learned from some specific places in where we were actually developing our classes and our workshops on speculating on developing a different scale devices, open systems, open architecture, living infrastructure are changing over time, sometimes generated by very simple component available on site and within a sort of local industry or local economy approach. And another one is the self-construction of relational space. So some of our projects were actually developed with the local community within a logic of somehow supporting their ideas or regenerating common public relational spaces where self-construction is a strategy to eventually self-responsibilize them. Another one is more like citizens as factories and local industries, which I think is a very powerful thing for everyone here, not just African countries and African economies. This idea of transforming material side, this idea of working on local industries, this idea of minimizing greenhouse gas emissions on transporting and cutting, extracting material from one place to another. And this idea of using digital technologies, digital manufacturing, digital fabrication in this direction. The last two chapters are more on the project we are doing. One is more like in Cameroon, in Douala, which is somehow concentrating some of their previous experience. A 4 years project financed by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Agency of Cooperation. And another one, which is what we're doing now with UN Habitat, is an off-grid housing project. So very, 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 very quickly. Again, let's say the statement behind the African Farmers Project is really to start to understand what are the trends, the climatic trends, which are affecting different aspects of sub-Saharan African society. Climatic trends, which are sometimes the effects of what is happening somewhere else, which are somehow obliging people to migrate, and trends that are somehow also interesting as a potential to take advantage of the way in which many regions in sub-Saharan Africa are much more familiar than us on technology, manufacturing. We have this idea that what is happening in Lagos or what is happening in Accra or what is happening in Dakar is mainly something low tech and is something that doesn't have anything in relation to our economies, which is partially true in the sense that their capability to transform, to develop in a very decentralized way, building device, technological device, is much more powerful than what we have. We are losing in Italy, I would say in Europe, but also in the United States, we are using this capability of sharing knowledge on technology. We're using this capability of understanding the social role of technology, like Marx was explaining very clearly. A community that owns their capability to transform and to materials and develop technologies on site is a community in control of the destiny. So there is a potential. There is a potential of evolving and understanding the relation between pre-colonial culture, technologically speaking, but also in terms of, let's say, the economic aspects related to this. There is a potential of somehow connecting and evolving educational and schools of architecture in these regions. And that's why we started to map not just schools of architecture, but also fabrication lab. Not because we are just makers, but because from our experience, fabrication labs, especially in Africa, fab labs, for instance, are much more interesting, much more dynamic, because they are dynamic spaces, autonomous spaces, where people, artisans, communities are like developing together much more than what is happening in Europe. So just to give you an example, we discovered that the second Fab Labs after the first one was made at the MIT in Boston, was in Secondi in Ghana. So not in London, not in Paris, not in Milan. And that means that, again, this familiarity I was mentioning before on technology and sharing technology is something that we could learn from. Of course, the idea behind this statement is that we as a scientific community or community of architects and engineers from the global north, we should start to look from another perspective what is happening in sub-Saharan Africa, from the perspective of Muhammad Ali, geographer, who's starting to represent Europe from another point of view, upside down, which is, I think, it's one of the main points that we were discussing also with my students, African students, no? African students sometimes they arrive in London or Paris or maybe in Turin, thinking that they really want to learn how to design and build with with high tech. No, they really want to know everything about the main technological aspects, and it was very difficult at the very beginning in conversation with them to convincing them that potentially the most advanced way to work with these aspects is to adapt technology to their context, to their heritage, and eventually transform it in something more specific, no? Contextualized. So contextualizing tools, contextualizing the way materials are developing it, and contextualize the way settlements, buildings could be developed. Again, the conversation were quite helpful. They were happening in different moments again. Some of them were on, again, ethnomathematics, what we call implicit algorithms, contextual algorithms. So, for example, the conversation on Ron English was about how we can reconstruct mathematical models out of informal settlements, and how we could actually develop, extrapolate these models where geometry is one of the main drivers, but there are other drivers, cultural drivers. For example, how a family is organized, what is the hierarchy, what is the spatial organization, and how this is generating very complex shapes, where the complexity is not an aesthetic thing, it's about self-similarity. So self-similarity as a way to accommodate different spatial needs for different kind of users, much more than in our technological our way to design buildings. Our way to design buildings is mainly, if we look to the window, mainly box, mainly same height, same space. If you see a village in sub-Saharan Africa, Pays d'Ogon in Mali, or somewhere in north of Cameroon, Muslim villages, from the top, you will see this kind of very complex patterns. And these patterns, again, are contextual algorithms, are redundant because they are repeating something which is working. And for me, as an environmental designer, this is very interesting. Working because they're using materials available on site. They're working because they are responding to very extreme climatic conditions. They're working because people on site are able to reproduce this, so scale this, and eventually increment this. So again, there are other interesting aspects. I would mention another one that I didn't mention before, which is Françoise Tebe. She's a Cameroonian architect, studied in Paris. Françoise is now one of the cultural driver in designing museums for the cultural heritage. She's doing 2 museums, one in Benin and another one in Cameroon. So she's questioning how to somehow, first of all, accommodate things that were coming from different European museums in a way which is not our way to conceive museum. We share knowledge and share artifacts. Again, addressing the question of space and knowledge and cultural heritage. So Francois has a very interesting role, a pivotal role, which is coming from their double origin, Cameroonian roots and their studies in France. So the conversations are somehow a conversation between myself and them, and some of them are very critical. Some of them, like Hanif Kara, was saying basically that yeah, he's an African engineer, but he's Indian. Hanif is an Indian, as my tutor, the architectural. You know that Indians are in many countries in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, Kampala, also in South Africa. And Hanif then studied engineering in London and now is teaching in Harvard. So is African-born, Indian originally, and then and it's the way he was thinking about African tectonics, completely different from what um, um, we're thinking where we start our experimentation. So again, this conversation have different dimensions. And one of these dimensions is also related to tools. So Ugo Lapietra, you know probably Ugo, is a designer, is a part of the radical movement, doesn't have anything to do with Africa at all. But there's at some point it was we were sharing a conference where it was saying, look, I think that what we did in the 60s and the 70s on global tools, which is one of the most radical projects they was developing with other Italian designers, I think is what is happening now in Africa. So this idea that tools are more relevant than design buildings. The designing tools and sharing tools is much more relevant. It was quite interesting for me because I never thought like this, but I did it. I made it with my students. Some of these projects I will show you are not about buildings. I'm more about making and designing tools that can allow them to be autonomous, can allow them to develop families of projects. So not give them the fish, but more like teach them how to fish and how to eventually also transform tools in something else. So so this is part of the topics of the conversation. Of course, the conversation were entering in the flows, the workflow of the African Farmer Approach gradually. Again, over time, we didn't do like this at the same point. And the projects are not linear. Some of them were like very small labs, very tiny budget, very extreme conditions. Some others more like, let's say, comfortable conditions and more time. But what this African Farmer Project has in common is a sort of climate-sensitive approach, where the climatic regions where we start to work with forming the way of using materials available on site. So from the very humid scenarios to the hot and dry. So what is available, and then the tectonics that are deriving from this. So that things you can do with earth that you cannot do with fibers, and vice versa, no? So climate, materials, tectonics, space. And the space is another key aspect. So we started in a space and architectural solution were like genotypes. Genotypes coming from biological vocabulary are open device, are initial prototypes open to generate families of variations, phenotypes. So genotypes means that what we try to do is not like just a finished product, but it's more like a protocol that somebody else could change over time, or could expand, or could simply hack and customize. So genotypes are, in some cases, in terms of research, let's say, approaches, but also in terms of pedagogical approaches, are very, very powerful because are obliging people more than just develop iconic project, but is develop a set of rules and constraints to share with others, share with the local community, to share with artisans. So once you have this set of rules and constraints, the results could be differentiated. And again, so genotypes, programmatic agendas, contemporary needs. So we didn't do like pre-colonial villages. We were like more working on with contemporary communities, contemporary needs. People that are online much more than you. You have like families all around the world, 6 mobiles, always Wi-Fi, buying bitcoins much more than us. So they are very digital, much more than us. And so how accommodate this informal and these digital things together? So communities are complex. These kind of communities are much more complex. Like people are, in touch with families in the United States, Europe, histories, and very, very interesting in this. So very quickly, so these projects were somehow declining, what I was just saying, in a paradigmatic way. So as paradigms, this can be replicated and changed and transformed. One of the first things I was starting to experiment on components and on tools in my experience with my students in Africa was related to another strange guy, Fabrizio Carola. Fabrizio Carola is not African, white, used to live originally from Naples, like myself, studied in Brussels, La Cambre, so very interesting, rigorous structural education. And Fabrizio was, for some reason, escaping from Europe at 24 years, 25 years, and start to work in between Mauritania, Mali, very low profile projects for a long time, schools, hospitals, completely unknown, and nobody knows him in Italy, maybe just some of us. he won an Aga Khan when I was like, I think, 65 or 70 years old. Fabrizio was a very interesting guy for me because he started to really understand the power of evolving local tools. And the reason I'm saying this is because Fabrizio was evolving a compass from the Nubian culture, which is the grandfather of a robotic arm. A compass which is allowing people to develop families of woodless construction, mainly vaults and domes, using always the same component, like very small terracotta bricks with, again, earth available on site. So, and so he was questioning this aspect of teaching people how to use the compass, not just to make building. And then we start to experiment together how the compass, his compass, could be hacked, transformed a little bit. So what is our contribution? Like 30, 40 years less than Fabrizio. I start to ask myself, what can we do more? What can we eventually possibly upgrade? Very difficult to say because Fabrizio was doing almost everything with his compass. But we start to develop a sort of a multi-parametric approach where these families of boats and domes could generate more thermal inertia, could accommodate, could collect rainwater during the rain season and develop filter depuration process. So using this in different direction to improve the environmental performances, basically. And we did it mainly for the Mali context, and we did it in a way to upgrade something that is already existing. So nobody's inventing anything, and nobody's. And we start to interfere also with robotic arms. We start to question, okay, what a robotic arm can do, what environmentally speaking, and we start to develop collaboration with the ATH Zurich on that. We did the first dome with Fabrizio and with a group of researchers of smart geometry made out a robotic arm, just to compare timing, energy consumption, what is more interesting, what is less interesting, what is the contribution of humans, what is the cost of this. So this is very important. We don't have to work in the dichotomy between high tech and low tech. We just need to be very lucid. We need to compare what is affordable, what is not, what is meaningful, what is not. If we are lucid, we can really be opportunistic on that. So this is very, I don't have any ideological problem with high tech as far as this is affordable and is meaningful for me, for my community. And we made it also, I think, Francesca, we met in this occasion. It was a long time ago in Naples during the World Urban Forum, where we start to discuss with the people like Vincent Kitillo and his team on the energy unit of the UN Habitat about developing within a simple component, like a small timber component, open device that could unfold, off-grid devices that could unfold different let's say, programs, accommodation. So this is a mix of things related to local materials, so small elements, timber elements, not industrialized, and photovoltaic membranes, so membranes that are light and easy to adapt to different shapes and easy to assemble and disassemble. So we start to enter this world of off-grid aspects, make people um, disconnected from the centralized systems, because this is one of the biggest topics in these countries, no, where there is a lack of infrastructures for many reasons, energy infrastructure, water infrastructure. So how we could develop contemporary solution within another logic, another perspective. So at the same time, the African Fabbers start to become a gym, a platform, a gym for our students, for my students to share knowledge with local communities, and we start to develop different non-humanitarian projects, as I was mentioning before, where we experience the physical implication of working with this material. I think this is very relevant for everyone. I think we should all, once in our life, experience this to really give a value of resources, water, energy. And once you experience this in very extreme conditions, climatic conditions, you really start to understand what is relevant and what is not. So that's why I think this is a very good gym, pedagogically, but also in terms of the research agenda that we need to share. So apart from who was using this and how was using this, for us, it was a very interesting way to really understand what is needed to make small devices like playgrounds that are made out of local materials are producing, overshadowing, protecting students and children outside the schools. And we started to do with two logics. One is like woodless construction and earth, and another one light structure. So this is a project in Saleh, Morocco, where we're actually mapping informal techniques, tensile cables. So again, I'm not a structural engineer. Eventually, I'm a technologist. I'm mainly a designer. But this interesting for me is the combination of these different aspects. So how we could um, extrapolate something from emergent technologies, things that are happening in an informal way in the Medina of these places, and how we could use it in a more strategic way in public spaces, like in relational spaces, common spaces, because people are not using this because they are not comfortable. And this is where my environmental design interests are. So how to make temporary space comfortable in this kind of extreme condition, overshadowing, ventilation. So light structures for us were probably one of the best strategies to evolve local knowledge on tents and tent sites, attaching tent sites with almost static techniques to existing infrastructures like electrical infrastructures, piles in shrinking places like abandoned places. And we did with mainly non-architects. We did it with people more like local activists and school teachers and children and artisans. So this is just to stress one thing. When you decide strategically that your research and your pedagogical activity is not developed in a classroom like where we are here, but your classroom is the street, then there is another aspect you start to integrate in your agenda, which is negotiation. Okay? And I think this is also in terms of the ecological aspect of our way of thinking architecture and urban ecology is very, very important. And it's a scientific thing that we need to address. Negotiation. We need to be able to educate our students to negotiate with local community. I'm saying this because we had to negotiate between two communities. One was proposing this thing, and after one night, another part of the community was destroying this. So we went to the head of the mosque of this neighborhood, and we start 2 days meeting for a small tent. And it was fantastic to understand how students were actually leading this, and then eventually involve everyone in one solution. In other cases, we were not necessarily developing a building or a design product. We were developing an approach. So this is what we did at the Marrakesh Biennale a few years ago, I think 2014, where we were basically proposing to with a group of students. So we normally did, and we normally do calls online. Like African students are much more active than us online. So we start to become very famous. We did call online, everything for free. People were able somehow to reach us from different regions, and they were joining us. 20 people in this abandoned industry in the Medina of Marrakesh to speculate on one very specific thing: how to mix local techniques on ceramics and digital fabrication on ceramics, and how to experience. So this abandoned factory became for 10 days almost a fabrication laboratory with less construction, local clay. And we start to develop our material library and transform the space in a space of production experimentation, protocols of materials to be extruded, what we could do, what we could not do. We had a technological partner at that time, as like an Italian partner, WASP. And we started, it was a long time ago, and we start to discuss with the students, Moroccan artisans, the School of Artisans of Fez and Meknes, how to self-construct 3D printed with the local materials, open source devices, transportable, energetically self-sufficient. So, and we made it. I mean, we transformed this, and so they start to continue to develop this, and they start to understand what is interesting and what is not, what is interesting in using conventional tools, and what is interesting using digital tools. And we did a similar project in Dakar, in Senegal, where the group of artisans, we were actually questioning their role in the neighborhood. And their role in the neighborhood was related to the condition of the workspace, okay? So the workspace as this one, like small barracks, incredibly hot, very difficult to share machinery. And so we decide together to create a sort of an extension, like the lab as a public space. So a sort of common hut, self-designed and self-fabricated by themselves with us, where they can actually share part of their work in the machine outside as an open-air laboratory. Also to involve the people of the neighborhoods to develop some, and to develop training sessions, because their labs is too small. So, oops. Takes a while. So again, small local components assembled on site within the logic of redundancy, a system that you generate like a sort of a common shelter to reduce overshadowed space, but also to minimize the solar radiation impact on the existing laboratories. And then in the end, these two initiatives, two projects we were developing. This one is maybe the most comprehensive one. It's the one that we were developing for the last 5 years. It was arriving from a call from the Italian AICS, Agenzia Italiana Cooperazione allo Sviluppo, with some local partners. NGO, Italian NGO, local partners. So we arrived to Cameroon with this idea to develop a cultural hub. Now, cultural hub is everything and nothing at the same time. And we start to develop with the partners a sort of an initial idea of what is a cultural hub. What is a cultural hub? What is a school of ecological construction or urban ecologists in year 2020, that time, in sub-Saharan Africa. And we start to go back to our studies on pre-colonial experience on schools of architecture. Schools of architecture were open site. Like this picture is the Mosque of Genet, which is in Cameroon, one of the most ancient mosque in the world. This system is an open device. It's not just a building. Every year after the rainy season, the community stops to work for, I think, a couple of weeks just to rebuild, reshape. And the result is interesting because it's a sharing knowledge thing where people from different generations are participating. Women, men, elderly people, young people, is a cultural thing. They stay together, they play together, they build together, they cook together, they play music, they dance. So it's 24 hours and every year. And the result of this is always different. So the buildings is self-similar. It has like a wall frame structure, which is just made out of small timber elements. And then the adobe part is similar. When a group of scientists, I think from Austria, start to propose them to make like a very interesting product to fix this, they had like 1 week meeting, and they say, no, thanks. We don't want that because this is our cultural way to share knowledge. So a cultural hub is an open device. It's a system that is generating other projects. It's a way to share knowledge in an open source way. Is a way to conceive architecture and design artifacts as systems that are open and affordable. And so there is a question of authorship also, which is very relevant for me. And then we need to discuss what, for us, is relevant in terms of authorship. I think we as architects and engineers, we need to understand that probably we need to discuss a collective form of authorship where we share ideas and strategies into one solutions. And we are somehow also renouncing to our portion of authorship into like another dimensions to allow people to express themselves and develop collective solutions. So a cultural hub is all these things together, not just for architects. This was condensing a school of fine art, laboratories of manufacturing, exhibition space, and other things. And we start to do it by listening, mapping for many times, very complicated. Wow, a lot of time, a lot of different ideas, a lot of contrast, conflicts, again, negotiation. And this is very complicated, but at the same time, mapping local heritage, local materials, local artists, local artisans. How to create this common ground, how to allow people to self-identify in this, to use it after our work is finished. So, so we start from a very strategic point of view. We start by refurbishing an existing building, an abandoned school, and injecting the lab as a productive space. Because we always think that the production is the key thing. We start to use the production space as a driver to think and start to develop in a, again, shared way our system, then we can potentially develop the rest. So the lab was the very first thing. The lab was mainly for shoes. Let's say that Cameroon is exporting, I would say, 60% of the timber on the Italian industry of furnitures. They're made in Italy. It's made out of the Cameroon timber. But the timber is just cut and transported here. Nobody's paid to transform this material on site. So you can imagine the environmental impact of that, the economic impact of that. So nobody in Cameroon is paid to develop furniture there and eventually also for local. For sure, for us, a manufacturing lab on timber, like convince local people that timber is a good materials. After like instead of Chinese steel or Ivorian Coast low quality plastic or other thing, it was a huge thing. It's a cultural thing, a political thing. So we said, okay, one thing is clay and another thing is timber. And we start to develop laboratories, training people. As Ugo Lapierre said once, it's not important at the very beginning what you do. It's like more like testing. Material library, material archive, emergent shapes, and then gradually understand how to use this within an architectural approach. And we did it with an initial prototype of an off-grid architectural systems. Our students were not basically, there are 2 architects on 20, coming from, again, a call coming people from Nigeria, Congo to Douala. Fantastic, because these places start to become a driver, not just for the city itself, but also because it's the first laboratory with this machinery around the region. So responsibility as well, and the responsibility was to bring ceramists, Ebonists, and other people into one, condense all this knowledge in one initial scale, one to prototype. It's like the idea to develop an initial prototype for the local community of a sort of an off-grid housing device, something that is somehow working with natural ventilation and daylight control, is minimizing the effects of solar radiation, is producing energy. So all these things together, which were actually helping us to develop the second part of the work, which was the building itself. So it's arriving at the very end of the project. This is also very important for us. We didn't start from the building, we start from the people, and we start from the knowledge. And then finally, the people was involved to develop models, maquette, and develop components of this building together. And the component of this building were like condensing the agenda protocols of developing facade elements, structural elements, roof elements, things that other people of the neighborhood could extrapolate and apply to their building. Of course, we are digital, we are environmental designer. So we start to shape this in a way that could actually help to work with natural ventilation, mitigating solar radiations, so fluid dynamic analysis versus a very analog element. And the result of this is something that we call synthetic vernacular. It's not vernacular, it's not even like a modernist thing, it's something that is already happening there, like a combination of things, which is an hybrid. We can discuss how elegant or less elegant is, but for us, it's important to start to think about the new aesthetics of synthetic vernacular, which is a combination of, again, materialities, devices, informal materialities as well, informal, less informal. And I will arrive to the end just to introduce you to another topic, which is like coming from this Cameroonian project. At one point, one of the director of UNAB that contact us to a Cameroonian, Vincent Kitio, which is in the conversation of the book. Again, born in Douala, studied in Venice, did a PhD in Roma La Sapienza, I think, in environmental design. Now is the director of the energy unit in Nairobi. So again, cultural part, complexity. So Vincent say, Paolo, we need to discuss because we are developing the guidelines for different countries about affordable housing. And that would be very interesting to discuss let's say, semi-industrialized approach to this, where digital manufacturing could be part of that, where like small laboratories like the one you are establishing here could be established elsewhere, transforming local materials, sharing knowledge, and using also some skills on predicting the performance, thermal energy. So we start to develop this project within integrating our what we learn and what we start to do within a sort of, again, modular, industrialized, but also, as I was mentioning before, similar approach. So modular element that could be diversified according to different orientation, different context, different climatic condition, different users needs, space, water, energy. And we start to develop this as a structural device that could be somehow adapted to different shape to upgrade slums. So not gentrify, not erase things, but eventually substitute some small elements, reuse the material, and adapt to the skin of this in order to course with some ideas of mixing local, low-tech, and more like digital manufacturing devices. So I'm stop myself here because I maybe I take too much. This is more or less what we did. I gave a copy of the book to Marta as for you guys, basically. I hope you're gonna have time to have a look. I cannot share the PDF, unfortunately, because the publisher doesn't want. I will be more than happy to have a conversation, start today, but maybe be in touch with you in the future. So if you have any question, thanks for your time.
Yeah. Okay, do you have any questions? And first of all, thank you so much for the lecture. It was really inspiring. So please go ahead with your questions. Okay, let's start with you.
So thank you for your lecture. I want to ask you one thing because the description of single project, single activities, especially in this context, like you said, each activity is influenced by thousands of externalities about the context, about the community, about the economic situation, about the politics, and so on. So I'm in my research, I'm trying to analyze something very different, also very similar in this point, because I have a lot of singularities that happen because in the background, in the context, something happened. And now I'm in the pretty at the end of my research, and I'm trying to understand which is my responsibility now that I collect a lot of singularities to create something that to scientific knowledge that can be useful also for other experimentation now on. So my question with you is, are you able now, and it's possible also, trying to extract something, some key points, some suggestions, some trajectories that can help others to have other experimentation in the future?
Thanks for your question. I think this is very, very relevant because as I was saying at the very beginning, I think all these topics transversal into the African public approach could be declined elsewhere. I think they're all actual everywhere. I think the future of I would say in general of our communities as the community that have to deal with some very, very challenging issues, because climate change is a challenging issue. Energy cost is a challenging issue. Cost of productions issues for also our global North countries. So I think the experimentation, and this is what we are also starting to do now, UK, for example, are based on the idea that we are in a situation where we need to unlearn something from unlearn is a key word, guys. I think unlearn is very, very important. We need to unlearn about the conventional way we were thinking about the building industry, for example, or the decision making of how community are negotiating their way of shaping the built environment. And we need to unlearn this because we arrive at the point where there's so many interests, so many centralized interests, so many economic interests that we cannot control as democracy anymore in our countries, not in Africa, in our country. Just to give you a couple of examples. Now, I was in Lisbon 1 week ago, after the blackout. You remember the blackout in Portugal, Spain, and France, with some colleagues and friends and architects, and starting to discuss about Portuguese colleagues, and start to say, okay, this is a very strange thing because we are dependent on Spanish networks, even if we are available to produce the energy that we need. And we've been affected by this blackout because the Spanish system was not able to manage the frequency, basically, of the energy coming in from renewable energy, so not even from nuclear. So it's a double discussion on, wow, we are a European, we have a lot of renewable resources, and we couldn't be able to avoid this blackout, which is quite impressive, guys. 18 hours, almost 18 hours of blackout for a Western country. For African country, this is happening almost every day. And they develop some very interesting strategies, decentralized strategies to avoid or to mitigate effects of this in common life, productive. So what I'm trying to say, responding to your question, is we need to experiment ways of developing off-grid communities in Europe. Microgrid systems that are where people are, communities are somehow sharing technologies, economies. First of all, to minimize the impacts of our families' energy costs. No, I don't know here in Italy, but in UK, was like exploding, like literally exploding. So the energy cost is a nonsense cost. No. Of course, conflicts are generating this. Sometimes conflicts are made out this interest. So what I'm trying to say is that probably we need to learn from this kind of what we normally consider naive approaches on these places, a way to become a little bit more autonomous, a way to develop again responsive devices which are somehow responding to extreme climatic conditions, because extreme climatic conditions are arriving to Europe and United States and also elsewhere. And so we need to learn how to do this in an affordable way, not with like high-tech things like mechanical ventilation. We need to, and that's why I think that we need to unlearn, because we shouldn't, like the first thing we did this morning, we opened the windows, like cross ventilation. So because this building is critical, it's beautiful, but critical at the same time. It was designed when the climate change was not like this, different conditions, different programs. So what I'm trying to say is that this is the moment where design need to be informed by this informal and sometimes not conventional, sometimes not high-tech approaches. The way the decision making needs to be a little bit more, I would say, bottom up and not top down. The way the housing projects are developed and communities are organized in cooperatives, and cooperatives are organized in microgrid and off-grid communities. So there's a lot to do on that aspect, and we are doing this now. We are transforming the African off-grid. Fantastic, no? We say to UKRI, which is the CNR in Italy, it's basically the Ministry of Research. You say, okay, they was financing part of this research in Africa. I say, oh, yeah, let's do it in Africa. That's fantastic. We proposed the same research for the UK context. And they say, yeah, probably this is interesting for us as well. So how you were learning from this project to develop affordable off-grid housing in UK, which is another enormous issues happening now. And the reason why the last politics, the Labour Party was winning, basically. So design need to be unlearned, and technology need to be affordable. So experimentation, like shifting this, could be possible.
Okay, thank you very much for the lecture and for that explanation. I have two questions, so maybe if you can answer them shortly. But the first one is something you said at the beginning of the lecture, which was this idea that academia can function as a really interesting platform for bridging, but at the same time, and a little further in the lecture, you said something like you talked about the rigidity of academia. And, you know, like how you were doing something 15 years ago that was sort of experimental for rigid systems within academia or the studio or teaching. So if you could explain a little bit how you navigate that, like how you...
From experimentation to real life.
How do you navigate the rigidity framework, like the way that, for instance, academia is working in how to, I don't know, from how to assess or your research with index, you know, like a very rigid sort of way to approach.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then the second question is regarding, because your work is so interesting in sort of, again, bridging technology, like let's say computer design or technology or computer thinking with more traditional situated community-based design. And so I was thinking, what were your, I'm very interested in hearing your opinion on both biennials. Let's say Leslie Loco's biennial, the Laboratory of the Future, which was very much situated in Africa. And the outcome of that, I don't know if you saw that show. And then the current show, Carlo Ratti show, you know, like with the opening to new knowledge of, or incorporating new knowledge. So.
Okay. I think the question of strategically develop this kind of experimentation was, first of all, based on a very simple but I would say subversive idea. And then, first of all, I had to convince my students. This is the first test. They are not comfortable with that. No, because experimentation needs a very important criteria, failure. And in our universities, sometimes these criteria are not tolerated. No, failure, you need to fail. If you want to experiment, you need to fail in a strategic way, not like in a random way, but you need to crush. You need to crush. You need to stress, not people, but you need to stress the, let's say, the prototype that you are developing to really understand how much this could be replicable, how much this could be adaptable, how much this could be affordable and responsive. So on this question of failure, we build our, and if you want to read the book, you're going to read a lot of story about failures, about so it's I think this is very important, because when you fail with the local community, you achieve a lot of credibility. And this is another point. Credibility is based on the fact that you are there with them, you put your face, you put your energy, you put your eventually knowledge to test something that you are not selling. And I'm not selling anything. I'm experimenting. You have to be very clear at the very beginning. And again, if it's not possible, that's fine. Friends as before. So experimentation is, and then eventually when you fail, but you need to fail, you need to stress, you need to crash. All these prototypes have like hundreds of versions as usual. And then you achieve a credibility, because you made it for the first time and you know what you need to avoid for the second time, what you need to... I'm always very skeptical when people are proposing like finished product, things that you already know that are working. And that's why this kind of infrastructural approach is more, I think, interesting. How to assess this? You could assess in two ways. One is like, making simulations, structural simulation, environmental simulation, which is fantastic. Everything, I used to be in my parallel first life a consultant, working for Arup and other engineering firms. You do simulation. It works. It's a miracle. Every time it's working. And you don't need to change anything. It's just working because you just set the simulations in a way that is working. So what I'm trying to say is that you need to combine linear and non-linear things. And scientifically speaking, I think the challenge now is to assess non-linear things that have a human factors that you cannot predict because people are different, because things are always changing over time, because there is this tension in between the people, the artisans, users, and you need to assess these over years. And I will tell you, and this is probably also answer to the second question. African Fabbers has become now a network. So my former students are now architects. My small projects now generate, and I would probably propose a second book, which is not this prototype, but the prototype is made out after years based on this experience. Fantastic, like completely for different uses, but self-similar. We did a logic or something that is somehow a continuation of an experimentation. And I think this is for me and for them as well is very, very powerful. It's powerful because there is the idea that you are not again developing an object. But you are developing something that, again, is a protocol. You are developing something that is a device. So a device is different from a building. It's something that could be replicated and differentiated. And the challenge now is to, again, and I hope one day we're going to find a synergy between us, between also the stakeholders, between the local community, is to make an economic model out of that. But not just for them, also for us. And again, I want to finish this this conversation with the message. The message is that this is our main, as European and also as people from other countries and global South, our main concern now. Our main concern now is to develop economic models that are based on self-organized communities, technological communities, not like naive people like that doing whatever is happening. No, they are like trained digitally and in an analogical way to create local industries. So a sort of intelligent prefabrication, affordable prefabrication system, not just for housing, but also for other, where the difference is about, let's say the contextual contribution will be about how the local indigenous technology will inform this configuration in site-specific way. So I don't have, of course, I don't have the recipe for this, but I know very clearly that, and that's why I'm talking to everyone, also to industries, not just you, NGO or activists, because I think this is our role. This is your role as PhD students, my role as an educator, Francesca's role as a professor. This is our role to bridge political interest, economic interest, industrial interest, and communities' interest. It's again, it's and the experience. And this is the only way and the only reason I did this book. I never, to be honest with you, when I was doing this, I never thought myself I would one day do a book or an exhibition. We made, I don't know how many Venice Biennale and things like that. We became very popular despite us, because we were the only one who were really doing experiments, like not humanitarian, not like a wholesome foundation project, or again, nothing against this, but we made it in a different way. So we know that it's possible and we can improve it and we can eventually. So our role, the role of this classroom and the role of other classrooms, because this book is mainly presented in universities, because I decided that I don't care about the commercial aspect of this, because of that, because I wanted to know from you what we can do together next, if we can make on these topics. If you, so not just answers, not just questions, but answers as well. That would be nice to get, or proposal.
Thank you. I don't know if we have time for maybe
Maybe one more.
one
maybe Francesca?
last quick question, maybe if we have one.
So I was just a little bit curious about how you were able to introduce the parametric system models, and you spoke about mathematical models out of like the informal settlement. Looking at the type of architecture that is found in the location where you're experimenting, that is in Douala, Cameroon, how were you able to convince them about the solution you were expecting from the experiment you were proposing? I don't know. Do you really understand my question?
Sorry, I don't catch. Then
Okay. So my question is, look at the form of architecture
Yeah.
where you proposed to exercise your experiment. How were you able to?
so when how everything starting basically, or
How did you integrate the parametric
in the
into like the form of architecture you found in the area you have gone to like make an experiment?
so each project here has a different story, guys. Some of these projects were completely self sponsored and somehow coming from a specific request from a local community. And as I mentioned before, sometimes the network of previous students are like could be your case, studying here in Europe and coming back and start to propose a topic or a community and start to develop a sort of crowdfunding, which is financing this. And this is gradually we are preparing like a sort of a strategy and a sort of specific agenda. Sometimes it's coming from a foundation that
The parametric design into the
That form of architecture you find in the area.
even the digital but this is coming from a mix of things again, because again, when the proposal is coming from a local driver, and the local driver is part of the network, people that are sharing the same agenda, like for example, people that were studying with me somewhere in Europe, like African students, they start to prepare the ground, basically. So they start to develop workshop together, and we start to teach them how to use a specific software in advance, or specific the use of a specific machinery in advance. So this is again, I think it's very strategic. Going back to what I was saying, so the digital thing is coming gradually. And I think what is important is the role of social driver. People like in between two communities, and they are like gradually injecting the relevance of eventually teach how to use something or learn how to use something else. Um, um, Sometimes what we experience in sharing digital knowledge, for example, and then we did it strategically, is that when you have to, for example, self-build a tool like a 3D printer, you learn much better how to use it then. And I think this is also very powerful. So if you buy something completely new, digitally working, in some cases you could be very scared. You will not use it, basically. But if you are not buying the finished product, you are just studying how it works, how the software works, how the mechanic works, and then gradually you self-build it, and you are assembling, and you are tested. This is becoming another experience. This is becoming another way also to customize these softwares, to customize this tool, and to make it like more I would say, useful for your specific interests. So there is no dichotomy between analog and digital culture. I think it's more an alternative way to teach this. But this is what also I'm doing in London with my university, my students, not necessarily from Africa or from Global South. And this is about unlearning. So I'm not going directly to the Fab Lab the first day to make things happen. I'm following like a step-by-step process, which is, first of all, starting from a critical material library, where the material coming from, tracing material, and then understand local indigenous technologies, because every country has a digital history, technological history, and then start to develop their own thing. And sometimes this thing is analog initially, and then we integrate some digital thing. So we use Arduino, or we use other thing to transform like an analog device into a digital one, but within a sequences of steps. And I think this is, pedagogically speaking, is very relevant, but also in terms of the research agenda. So the idea that you're arriving to a very complex, sometimes complicated digital, hardware or software, from the very initial idea that I normally is coming from a question that I normally use when I start my course on fabrication, prototyping, and testing in London. It's a sentence from Cedric Price. Do you know Cedric Price? No. Yeah? Anyway, a British engineer was teaching at the... So Cedric Price was starting a conference at the very beginning, saying, okay, technology is the answer, but what was the question? So what is the question? Why? What you need it for? So we could say digital technology is the answer. We could update these questions. But what is the question? So once this question is clear, it's meaningful and relevant. Also, to be honest with you, some of these workshops were like 12 years old children, people that start to use Arduino, I would say in a couple of days, maybe. So I don't see any specific issue on that, apart from the fact that machines are machines and softwares are softwares, and you need to somehow cultivate meaningful interest to make this relevance for you, for your community. And this is a little bit more difficult than just learn how to use skills and digital skills. I have my students, for example, in London, like they use like tens of softwares. And if I see the results at the very beginning, then sometimes it's very poor. It's very standard. So I'm always questioning, why you use like 10 softwares if you're doing something that, we could do like... So it's critical. It's critical everywhere, not just in Africa, not just... I think, guys, I need to go now. Do you have another?
Yeah, we can end the lecture here. Thank you.
But Marta, maybe you can share also my email with you.
Yes, of course.
I have...
Quindi Jeff,
Una conferenza a Milano alle 6.
non dovrebbe essere un...
Posso fare stop share?
Secondo che...